Most women think they know why a man falls in love. Chemistry, connection, shared values, but that's usually just the surface. Underneath it, there are forces at play he probably doesn't even understand himself, and often she never notices them at all. This video is about those forces, the hidden ones, the quiet psychological patterns that Carl Jung spent his life studying, things that shape a man's emotions without ever announcing themselves. They're not about logic or compatibility. They live deeper than that. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That includes love. What if the reason a man falls hard for one woman and feels nothing for another has less to do with who she is and more to do with what she wakes up in him? Some women trigger something ancient. Some touch the part of him that still longs for safety. Others, whether they realize it or not, hold up a mirror to the version of himself he's never had the courage to explore. You might think this is about seduction or playing games. It's not. It's about psychology, memory, and emotional patterning. These 5 reasons don't show up on dating apps or love advice columns, but they show up in real relationships, in who he chooses, who he stays with, and who he can't forget. Let's start with the first reason, a reason that has nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with the first woman he ever loved. The first reason men fall in love without realizing why begins long before romance ever enters the picture. It starts in childhood, specifically with the earliest emotional bond he formed with his mother or whoever filled that nurturing role. Carl Jung called this the mother archetype, not the literal mother, but the imprint she leaves behind. Her warmth, her silence, her anxiety, her presence, all of it becomes part of the internal script a man carries into adulthood. He doesn't remember learning it, but it plays in the background of every relationship. Here's what that looks like. He meets someone and she feels familiar, not just attractive or nice. Familiar in a way he can't quite explain. Maybe she's soft-spoken, maybe she's firm, maybe she gives him space, or maybe she hovers a bit too close. But whatever it is, something about her energy reminds his nervous system of home. That familiarity can be comforting, or it can be unsettling. It depends on what kind of home he came from. If he had a nurturing mother, he might find himself drawn to kindness and empathy. If she was unpredictable, he might subconsciously seek out that same chaos, mistaking it for passion. Not because he enjoys suffering, but because the nervous system learns to find safety in what it already knows, even if it's not actually safe. This is where love gets tricky, because the pull he feels toward a woman might not be about her at all. It might be the echo of a very old emotional memory, and unless he's done the inner work to recognize that echo for what it is, he'll keep mistaking repetition for connection. One study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people often feel stronger attraction to individuals who remind them, consciously or unconsciously, of their caregivers. It's not magic. It's pattern recognition wired into our biology. A woman might think, he's falling for me because of how I look, how I think, how we laugh at the same jokes. But beneath all that, something deeper is happening. He's responding to how she feels, her presence, her emotional rhythm. Does she feel like comfort or chaos? Does she trigger a need to protect or a desire to be protected? He doesn't usually know. He just knows he wants to be around her. And if you asked him why, he might say, "I don't know. There's just something about her." That something is often the mother archetype playing out in real time. And unless we make that connection conscious, it can either create profound intimacy or trap us in cycles we don't understand. Let's move to the second reason. It has less to do with family and more to do with the secret emotional life every man carries within him, one he rarely talks about. Carl Jung believed every man carries within him a hidden feminine side. He called it the anima. It's not about gender or sexuality. It's about emotion, intuition, softness, creativity, Qualities many boys are taught to ignore, suppress, or even feel ashamed of. But the anima doesn't disappear. It lives quietly in the background, shaping his dreams, his fantasies, his attachments. When a man falls for a woman, especially fast and hard, it's often because he's projecting his anima onto her, not seeing her as she is, but as the living, breathing expression of his own missing piece. That's why the early stages of love can feel otherworldly, why he might describe her as angelic or different from everyone else. He's not lying. He's just under a spell, his own spell, the one he cast unknowingly by seeing in her the things he's lost touch with inside himself. She becomes, in his mind, the gatekeeper to a softer world, one where it's safe to feel, to dream, to stop performing. She holds space for what he hasn't allowed himself to hold, and that's powerful, sometimes overwhelming. This isn't the same as putting someone on a pedestal. Pedestals are about control and fantasy. Anima projection is more personal, more intimate. It's like falling in love with a mirror you didn't know was yours. Jung warned that this kind of love, if left unchecked, can become a trap because it's not based on truly seeing the other person, but on chasing a feeling of reunion with a lost part of the self. And it's fragile when reality sets in and he starts to see the woman as a full person with flaws, moods, needs of her own. The projection cracks. Sometimes he pulls away. Sometimes he feels betrayed. But really, he's grieving the loss of his own illusion. You'll hear men say things like, "She changed," or "It just doesn't feel the same." But what they're really saying is, the version of her I fell in love with turned out to be me. This doesn't mean the love was fake. It means it was based on unconscious need instead of conscious understanding. And most women never know it happened. They just know he got distant, confused, maybe overwhelmed by a connection that burned too bright and too fast. Understanding the anima isn't about manipulation. It's about recognizing that sometimes what draws a man in isn't something you do, it's something you symbolize. And symbols have power, but they're not always stable. Now let's move to the third reason, one that has nothing to do with projection and everything to do with what happens when a man feels safe enough to let go. Some loves don't feel peaceful. They feel electric, disorienting, almost like being haunted. And it's not because the other person is toxic. It's because they reflect back parts of us we've buried. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the side of ourselves we don't want to see, our anger, our fear, our envy, but also our suppressed creativity, our sexuality, our hunger for freedom, everything we've pushed down to survive or to fit in. When a man meets a woman who mirrors that shadow, who embodies traits he's rejected in himself, it shakes something loose. She might be bold where he's cautious, wild where he's controlled, emotional where he's stoic. She becomes, without trying, a walking invitation to look at himself. This is the kind of love that doesn't always make sense. It feels irrational, fast, maybe even forbidden. But it's not the woman herself he's drawn to. It's the recognition, the way she pulls out something in him he thought he lost or was never allowed to express. Sometimes it's liberating. She opens the door to his real self, the version of him he never had the chance to grow into. Other times it's terrifying because seeing your shadow reflected in someone else doesn't feel romantic. It feels like being caught. That's why this kind of connection often swings between attraction and resistance. One minute he's all in, the next he's retreating. He's not playing games, he's overwhelmed. He doesn't know whether he's falling in love or falling apart. And the truth is, it can be both. The woman in this dynamic might notice it too. She'll feel him pull close when she's being raw or unapologetic, and pull away when things get emotionally intense. She might even start doubting herself, wondering if she's too much. But she's not too much. She's just touching a part of him that's unhealed. Jung believed that falling in love with your shadow projected onto another person is a powerful step towards self-integration, but only if you recognize it. Otherwise, it turns into obsession, push-pull patterns, and emotional confusion. When a man is drawn to his shadow in someone else, it's not about compatibility, it's about awakening. That awakening might turn into real love, or it might be the storm that forces him to finally confront who he is beneath the mask. Either way, he won't forget her, because she didn't just show him affection, she showed him himself. Now let's talk about the last reason. It's quieter, less psychological, but just as powerful. It has to do with timing, chaos, and the illusion of fate. There's a moment in almost every love story when someone says, "It just felt meant to be." The timing was perfect. Or maybe it was all wrong, but still, something about it made them believe it was written somewhere. That's not just poetry. That's how the psyche makes sense of emotional turning points, especially when life is in flux. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, a kind of meaningful coincidence that seems too aligned to be random, and it shows up a lot in love. When a man is going through something, grief, failure, identity shifts, he becomes emotionally porous. The usual logic that guards his feelings starts to loosen. If, during that time, he meets someone who seems to get him, it hits different. She doesn't just feel like a person, she feels like a sign. This happens more often than people realize. He doesn't fall in love with her just because of who she is. He falls because of when she showed up. The emotional context gives her presence weight. She becomes associated with a new version of himself, one he's just starting to meet. That emotional anchor can feel like fate, but really, it's chemistry mixed with vulnerability, wrapped in timing. Think about how often people say, "She came into my life at the exact moment I needed her," or "If we had met earlier, it wouldn't have worked." That's not just coincidence. It's the mind trying to organize chaos into story. The woman might not know any of this. She might just be herself, steady, kind, or even chaotic in her own right. But to him, she's part of the shift, a symbol of transformation. He bonds her to the feeling of awakening. And once that happens, it's hard to untangle. Sometimes this leads to genuine love. Other times it fades once the emotional storm settles. But while it lasts, it feels cosmic. And if it ends, it leaves a strange ache, not just for the person, but for who he thought he was becoming with her. This is why love and timing are so closely intertwined. Not just in a practical sense, but in a psychological one. A man in transition is often a man in search of meaning. And love, in those moments, can feel like the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. And when the answer shows up in the form of another human being, it doesn't feel like chance. It feels like destiny. So, if you've ever wondered why a man loved you deeply and then drifted, or why someone seemed to fall in love with your presence before even knowing your story, maybe now you understand it had less to do with logic and more to do with his unconscious world. Sometimes love is built on what's visible, shared values, physical connection, time spent together, but often it's pulled from what's invisible. A familiar echo from childhood, a projection of his inner feminine, the safety to be emotionally bare, a sudden glimpse of his shadow, or the illusion of fate at a time when his life was shifting beneath his feet. Carl Jung's work reminds us that we're never just choosing people, we're choosing pieces of ourselves we want to understand, reclaim, or finally feel at peace with. That's why love can feel confusing, beautiful, even painful, because it's not always about the person in front of us. It's about what they stir awake inside. And maybe that's why some women never realize why he loved them in the first place. Because they weren't doing anything, they were just being. And in that being, they unknowingly opened a door. If this gave you a new way to think about love, psychology, or even your past relationships, let me know in the comments. What part hit you the hardest? What made you pause? And if you want more videos like this on the psychology behind love, identity, and relationships through the lens of Jung and beyond, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.